75-year-old Thomas Williams sat quietly in the corner of a bustling little diner, dressed in a modest, well-worn jacket, his calloused hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. His weathered eyes scanned the entrance, looking for his son, who was running late. The hum of conversations, clinking of glasses, and warmth of community surrounded him, but his presence seemed almost invisible, as if he were just part of the background. Thomas, a black veteran who had seen and survived more than most, was just another old man in the eyes of many. Little did he know, he was about to be faced with an indignity that would echo through his life. As the door swung open, 2 police officers entered, their uniforms crisp, their badges glinting under the diner's fluorescent lights. Officer Reynolds and Officer Steele exchanged glances, spotting Thomas seated alone in the mostly white diner. Without greeting, Reynolds approached, eyes narrowed, his voice cutting through the air. "What are you doing here, old man?" he demanded. Thomas met the officer's gaze, steady and calm, replying that he was simply waiting for his son. But his composed demeanor seemed to irritate them further, and they continued to press, their words heavy with disdain. "Funny, isn't it? A little old black man sitting here like he belongs," Steele sneered. Thomas didn't react, choosing instead to respond with quiet strength, explaining yet again that he was only there to wait. But his quiet confidence was like a thorn in their side. Reynolds demanded his ID, a demand dripping with derision. Thomas reached into his pocket and handed over his worn veteran's ID, the symbol of his service and sacrifice. But to Reynolds, it meant nothing. He laughed, waving it off dismissively. The officers exchanged taunts, making it clear they saw Thomas as out of place, a relic of a life that didn't matter. Yet, Thomas remained calm. He had faced much worse in his life, and he wasn't about to let these men break him. The other diners, now silent and watchful, didn't intervene. They simply sat, unwilling or unable to challenge the scene unfolding before them. As the atmosphere in the diner turned colder, the officers grew bolder. Reynolds sneered, announcing loudly that Thomas had no right to be there, and if he didn't leave, they would make him. Thomas, still calm, tried one last time to explain that he was waiting for his son, a right as simple as it was profound. But his words fell on deaf ears. The officer saw Thomas's quiet resistance as defiance. Without warning, Reynolds reached out, shoving Thomas's chair, tipping it backward with a harsh crash. The old man steadied himself, not with fear, but with the unbreakable resilience forged from a lifetime of hardship. Reynolds smirked as he moved closer, beginning a rough pat-down that seemed designed more to humiliate than to search. Meanwhile, Steele picked up Thomas's veteran cap from the table, studying it with disdain. "People like you don't deserve this," he muttered, tossing it carelessly to the floor. The crowd gasped, but no one dared to intervene. Thomas clenched his fists, swallowing the anger that burned inside him. His cap, his ID, these were symbols of his life, his sacrifices. And yet they meant nothing to these men. The officers weren't done. Reynolds grabbed Thomas's wrist, twisting it behind his back with brutal force. Thomas winced but didn't cry out. He knew pain. He had endured the horrors of war, both abroad and at home. But this was different. This was a direct assault on his dignity, his humanity. He finally spoke, his voice steady but laced with defiance. "I've seen horrors you couldn't imagine. I deserve better than this." But his words only fueled their anger. Reynolds laughed, mocking his words, and produced handcuffs, slapping them onto his wrists with a triumphant sneer. As the laughter faded, Steele picked up Thomas's worn, sturdy walking cane, the cane he had relied on for years, and broke it across his knee with a twisted grin. He tossed the shattered pieces aside as if they were nothing, a symbol of Thomas's pride and dignity now lying splintered on the floor. Thomas, who had fought on the front lines for his country, was reduced in that moment to a mere object of their derision. But even in his anger and hurt, he remained silent, holding on to his dignity like a lifeline. Then, something caught Reynolds's eye. His gaze fell upon a small, innocuous reservation card still lying on the table. Driven by curiosity, he picked it up, expecting nothing of significance. But as he read the name printed in clear, bold letters, Commissioner William Thompson, his heart stopped. Realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, a wave of dread crashing down over his arrogant confidence. Steele, glancing over his shoulder, saw it too, and the smug smile dropped from his face. The room seemed to close in around them as the gravity of their actions became painfully clear. Thomas Williams, the man they had just humiliated, was no ordinary old man sitting alone in a diner. He was the father of their boss, Commissioner Thompson, a man whose integrity and commitment to justice were well known in their precinct. The very thought that they had assaulted, insulted, and demeaned him, an honorable veteran and the commissioner's own father, left them paralyzed, rooted to the spot by the enormity of their mistake. The other diners sensed the shift in the officer's demeanor, watching with silent satisfaction as the two men, once so smug and arrogant, now stood speechless and visibly shaken. They had walked into the diner brimming with self-importance, but now they were just two men faced with the undeniable consequences of their prejudice and cruelty. Thomas sat calmly, observing them with a quiet strength that only deepened their discomfort. He didn't need to say a word. His silence was more powerful than anything he could have voiced, a stark reminder of the dignity they had tried and failed to strip away. At that moment, Thomas's silent endurance transformed the air around them. The officers knew there was no escape from the judgment hanging over them, no way to undo the shame of what they had done. The card was a simple piece of paper, but it held their fate in its few bold letters, a reminder that every act of cruelty and injustice eventually answers to a higher power. The diner's door swung open once more, cutting through the tense silence that had settled over the room. In walked Commissioner William Thompson, tall and commanding, his presence immediately drawing every eye. The buzz of conversation had faded into hushed whispers, the patrons sensing that justice itself had just entered the room. Commissioner Thompson's face was unreadable, his gaze steady and sharp as he took in the scene before him. His father, sitting quietly with a strength that spoke volumes, and two officers standing awkwardly, their postures stiff with barely concealed fear. The commissioner's eyes moved over the broken pieces of the walking cane on the floor, the spilled coffee, and the stains on his father's clothes. A flash of pain crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with the steely resolve of a man determined to uphold his principles. His heart ached to see his father, the man who had taught him everything about integrity and resilience, treated this way. Without a word, he approached the table and reached for his father's hand, the quiet acknowledgement between them clear and profound. Commissioner Thompson then turned to the two officers, his expression stern and unyielding. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in his tone was unmistakable. "What exactly do you think you were doing here?" he asked, his voice carrying both the weight of his position and the disappointment of a man who expected better from those in uniform. Reynolds and Steele began to stammer, their words fumbling over each other as they tried to explain themselves, their earlier confidence crumbling to dust. We didn't know who he was, sir," Reynolds finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "We had no idea." The commissioner cut him off, his eyes narrowing. "It doesn't matter who he is. Every person deserves respect, especially a man who has served this country." His voice was calm, but his words struck like iron, each one a reminder of the dignity and humanity they had so thoughtlessly stripped from Thomas. He continued, his gaze unwavering. "You don't get to choose who deserves decency. That choice was never yours to make." Reynolds and Steele stood motionless, their faces ashen, fully aware of the mistake that would likely cost them more than their pride. Commissioner Thompson ordered them to leave the diner and report to his office the following morning. They left in silence, heads bowed, the gravity of their actions following them out the door like a shadow. As the door swung shut behind the officers, Commissioner Thompson turned back to his father. The lines of pain and resilience etched on Thomas's face spoke of battles far greater than this one moment, and yet this confrontation seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. Commissioner Thompson gently reached over and unlocked the handcuffs, freeing his father's hands. The two men sat together, the silence between them filled with unspoken words, pride, pain, and a shared understanding of the price of dignity. "Dad, I'm so sorry," the commissioner said softly, his voice breaking. Apologies fell short, he knew, but his father's forgiveness wasn't what he sought. He wanted Thomas to understand that, even in his position of authority, he would not stand for such disrespect, especially not toward a man like his father. Thomas looked at his son, his eyes filled with the quiet pride that only a parent could hold, his lips curling into a small, forgiving smile. In that moment, the strength of their bond became unbreakable, a testament to everything they had both endured and overcome. News of the incident spread quickly through the community, igniting discussions about justice, prejudice, and the humanity that so often gets lost in the world. It wasn't long before the police department launched an investigation, and Reynolds and Steele faced swift disciplinary action. They were suspended from duty, with mandatory retraining ordered. The diner incident, though painful, became a turning point, a reminder to all that every person deserves respect, regardless of their background, age, or appearance. Commissioner Thompson's response set a new standard, one that challenged the very foundations of the community and began to rebuild trust within the department. Sitting in the diner, father and son shared a quiet meal, reflecting on what had happened. Thomas knew that his son's actions were more than a defense of him. They were a statement of the values he had instilled in him from the beginning. Thomas had faced countless battles in his life, both as a soldier and as a black man, in a world that didn't always accept him. But seeing his son stand up for justice gave him hope that his struggles had meant something, that he had left behind a legacy of resilience and integrity. As they prepared to leave, Commissioner Thompson placed a hand on his father's shoulder, a silent promise of protection, respect, and the determination to continue the fight for fairness and dignity for all. Thomas walked out with his head held high, his heart full of pride, not only for himself, but for the legacy he had built in his son. And as they left, there was a renewed sense of faith that change was not just possible, but already unfolding, one act of justice at a time. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos.